Welcome back. It's still Wednesday the 17th of November. A little more detail on this paper we've been looking at here that's showing that higher levels of vitamin D in the blood could be protective against severe illness and death, and some pretty convincing data really. Now before we get down to this, one of the headlines on the last video was that these paper authors are saying that we need higher levels of vitamin D when we don't get the sunshine, 4,000 to 10,000 international units of vitamin D per day, extra if you live in the north of England like me and you're not getting any sun. And that should be taken with 200 micrograms of vitamin K2 is what these authors are suggesting. Now I've just been reading some of your comments on the first part of the video. And a lot of people have said, well, there's no money in vitamin D. It's generic. You can make it really cheaply. It's not a problem. You can't really sell it and make a lot of money on it. Therefore, pharmaceutical companies probably wouldn't be too interested in running expensive trials on it, which is probably true. But others have said we do need an interventional trial, and we do. And really, the question has to be asked is why have we not had a large-scale interventional trial on something which is potentially so efficacious and so cheap? Both quite interesting questions, to be quite honest. So this is the paper. We're going to carry on looking at it now, and some pretty interesting things about general health here as well as specifically COVID. Now they point out deficiency of vitamin D limits the performance of systems in the body, resulting in increased spread of the diseases of civilization. Now these are diseases like obesity, high blood pressure, diabetes, and again these do seem to be more common in areas where there's low vitamin D. Certainly vitamin D deficiency can lead to high blood pressure, and we know that that is a significant COVID risk, for example. So a lot of diseases of civilization, cancer of the colon, ischemic heart disease, a lot of these do seem to be related to low levels of vitamin D, and also reduced protection against infection, and this paper saying reduced effectiveness of the vaccine. Now I've been asked this an awful lot. We know that low levels of vitamin D mean that the immune system doesn't work as well. Does that mean the vaccine doesn't work as well? And this is saying yes, that if people do have low levels of vitamin D and they're vaccinated, then the vaccine probably won't work as well. They won't generate such a good immune response. So another reason to have good levels of vitamin D. Now, COVID fatality rates correlate with the elderly, who might live in a facility where they don't get out very much. The elderly do tend to stay at home a lot. They don't get the sunlight, therefore they are lower in vitamin D. And we know from large-scale epidemiological studies that older people are lower in vitamin D, as are people with dark-coloured skins. Because the darker the colour of the skin, the more slowly you will make vitamin D. And we know that people with darker coloured skins living in a particular latitude in North America or north of England or wherever it is, darker coloured skins people do have lower levels of vitamin D. Comorbidities, well, COVID fatalities correlate with comorbidities, but there again, as we've just noticed, a lot of comorbidities correlate with low levels of vitamin D. So what is the absolute prime cause then? Of course, vitamin D levels go way down in winter when we don't make the sun doesn't make the vitamin D in the skin, and when do we get more colds and influenza and COVID outbreaks? It's in winter time, of course. So blood levels of 20 nanograms a mil. That's 50 nanomoles a litre. That 20 nanograms a mil is exactly the same as 50 nanomoles a litre. Sufficient to stop osteomalacia. Now, osteomalacia is the softening of bones. Now, what used to happen, particularly in children, was the bones were soft, and especially the weight-bearing bones, they would become bent, and they would get bent legs, bent long bones. Bow-legged, we used to call this. And that was caused by the lack of vitamin D, meaning that the bones had osteomalacia. But you can prevent rickets with just a relatively low level. 20 nanograms per mil is enough to prevent rickets. But what we're saying here is that To prevent other things, you need much higher levels. So rickets is protected first before we're protected from other things. These authors are saying it's preferable to have 40 to 60 nanograms per mil. That's 100 to 150 nanomoles per litre. And they're also saying that to get those kind of levels, you need to be taking 6 to 10,000 units of vitamin D per day to get up to those kind of levels, because we're not making it from the sunshine. We're not out in the sunshine all day. Now, there's vitamin D receptors now, definitely in bone, of course, but also in the intestine. So we know, for example, that low levels of vitamin D are correlated with higher levels of colon cancer. So these vitamin D receptors are actually all over the body. The activated form of vitamin D is a widespread hormone acting on many different parts of the body. Vitamin D receptors in the pancreas. Again, low levels of vitamin D are associated with prostate cancer, and people that have had prostate cancer seem to do better if we bunk up their levels of vitamin D. Such a simple intervention. Why isn't this being done? It's so simple to do. And immune system cells all seem to have vitamin D receptors, all of them. And vitamin D is also a powerful epigenetic regulator. Now, epigenetics is kind of complicated, but what epigenetics means is that we're born with a certain set of genes, but the way that we live, we can't change that set of genes that you're born with. That's determined at the moment that the sperm met the egg, when you're a zygote, at the point of conception. That can't be changed from that point on, but the genes which are switched on and off are influenced by the environment in the uterus and the environment after uterus, when you're born, in other words, and these are epigenetic factors. So epigenetics is the way genes are kind of turned on and off, and vitamin D is important to turn on good genes, is what this is saying. It's an important epigenetic regulator, influencing more than 2,500 genes. Now, this is incredible. Active in any one human being, you've probably got about 21,000 active genes. It was a very big surprise when we found out there were so few active genes. We had thought there was at least 100,000 active genes in people, but with the advent of the Human Genome Project, we now know it's only about 21,000 genes. So we see about 10% or more than 10% of genes require vitamin D for their normal activation, the hormonal form of vitamin D, which is derived from the vitamin D from the diet and from the sunlight. This is how important this is, because of course we are tropical creatures. We are evolved, designed for to live in the sunshine, and evidence of that coming up as well. Genetics, of course, it's mutations that cause cancer, so there's increased cancer risk. Diabetes mellitus, especially type 1, the autoimmune diabetes mellitus is associated with low levels of vitamin D, but probably diabetes 2 as well. Definitely acute respiratory tract infections are more common in low vitamin D. And viral lung infections that cause acute respiratory distress syndrome particularly. So way before COVID, it was known that people are more likely to develop acute respiratory distress syndrome, where the alveoli fill up with fluid, which is the big problem in COVID, of course. It was known that people with high levels of vitamin D are protected against that, regardless of the viral cause of that illness. So this is not particularly new. Chronic inflammatory diseases like rheumatoid arthritis, low vitamin D is a problem. Autoimmune diseases like thyroid disease, diabetes mellitus, ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, all of these are more of a problem in low levels of vitamin D. And multiple sclerosis is a big one now. I mean, multiple sclerosis, we've always known that it's less common near the equator, or especially if people were brought up near the equator. And now hundreds of people have written to me saying that they are so much better. Their multiple sclerosis is so much better now they're taking comparatively high doses of vitamin D. So obviously it would have been better to take it from childhood and probably hopefully prevent the lack of vitamin D deficiency would prevent the multiple sclerosis, but that's too late now. But if the multiple sclerosis is already there, the vitamin D does seem to help. It's an immunomodulatory properties. It's an immunomodulator. In other words, if there's not enough immunity, vitamin D will turn immunity up. If there's too much immunity causing inflammation, vitamin D will turn it down. It's like a kind of homeostasis. We don't want too much immunity causing inflammation. We don't want not enough, meaning we get rampant infections. And vitamin D just seems to modulate that. It almost brings about a homeostasis of the immune response, which of course is exactly what we want. And it regulates the innate and adaptive immune system. So innate immunity acting against a wide variety of organisms, adaptive immune system, the acquired immune system, which results in cellular and humoral immunity, as we've looked at before. And particularly on that, it's now clear that there's vitamin D receptors in all of the immune cells, it would appear. Certainly we can say for sure there's vitamin D receptors in the monocytes, which migrate into the tissues and become the macrophages. Absolutely vital immune cell, the big eaters. And the macrophages also release a full range of cytokines that coordinate the immune response and the inflammatory response, and indeed to a large extent the wound healing response as well. The T cells, the T lymphocytes, the B cells, the B lymphocytes. So the T cytotoxic cells that will destroy virally infected cells. The T helper cells, which will stimulate the B cells. And it's the B cells that produce the antibodies. And all these depend on vitamin D activating receptors within the cells. Otherwise, they're not going to work properly. The natural killer, the NK cells, these are the large lymphocytes that will again kill virally infected cells and kill cancer infected cells. And the dendritic cells, which actually derive from the monocytes. These dendritic cells, that they've got dendrites are branches, so the kind of branch cells like that in the tissues. And what they are is they're antigen presenting cells. So if there's a virus or something floating past, it's likely to come into contact with the dendritic arm of these dendritic cells, and they will then go to the lymph nodes and stimulate the immune response. So that would be the antigen. So these are antigen presenting cells, absolutely vital for the immune response, and that they need vitamin D to function. So moving on to supplements of vitamin D. Now, without calcium supplementation, this is where it gets a bit complicated, but we'll go through it. It is well worth sticking with. Without calcium supplementation, in other words, if you're not giving additional calcium, even high vitamin D3 supplement does not cause vascular calcification. So if that's a blood vessel there with its walls, we don't want calcium going into the walls of the blood vessel because they would become hard. This does happen. It's called drain pipe arteries. They become hard and inflexible like drain pipes and look like drain pipes on x-rays. We don't want that calcification. But what this paper is saying is that if we don't give calcium supplements, even very high levels of vitamin D does not cause this. Now, it seems that we might have been giving too much calcium for a long period of time. So these are my dad's calcium tablets here. There's different brands available. I mean, they're absolutely huge things. I think they contain about a relatively small amount of vitamin D. From memory, I think it might be as low as 400 micrograms of vitamin D, and they contain about a gram and a half of calcium. So all of this is nearly all calcium. They're like huge things. I mean, look at that. I mean, you couldn't swallow that. You just have to suck them. That's why they're lemon flavoured. Well, I wouldn't eat this now. It does taste of lemon, actually. But I wouldn't take it anyway because it's just, I don't need the calcium. Have we been giving people far too much calcium? Well, these tablets are just huge. Maybe we have. Because what this is saying is that we're not going to get this arterial calcification as long as the vitamin D is given without the supplementary calcium. So it looks like we might have been giving too much calcium. Because the body is very calcium thrifty. If you've got calcium, it won't start passing it out in the urine. It's going to conserve calcium. If your calcium levels are at all low, it certainly can conserve calcium. Vitamin D3 supplementation in the range of 4,000 to 10,000 international units. Now that's the equivalent of 100 to 250 micrograms. Are needed to generate this optimum level, which they're saying is 40 to 60 nanograms of vitamin D in the blood, which is 100 to 150 nanomoles per litre. So basically they're saying you need quite large amounts, between 4,000 and 10,000 international units per day to keep your blood levels up at this nice high level that's needed. Now, more than 20 nanograms per mil is enough to prevent rickets. But it seems that these much and that's what the advice has been given on, enough to prevent rickets. But now we know that vitamin D is involved in so many other things. We can now say with some confidence on this paper that this higher range is necessary, and of course in winter we simply won't make it. And what this paper is saying is that these higher doses, the 4 to 10,000 units. Remember we tapped into an email last year, and Anthony Fauci said he was taking 6,000 units a day, and he's a relatively small guy, so a bigger guy might need 10,000. That is quite conceivable. Pity it wasn't pushed out on the general population as much as we would have liked it to have been, but at least he was helping his own health by taking 6,000 units a day, which would be good. Anyway, the thing that people haven't known about much in the past is the role of vitamin K2. Now, direct quote from this paper. So taking these higher doses, 4 to 10,000 units of vitamin D a day, has been shown to be completely safe when combined with approximately 200 micrograms of vitamin K2, is what this paper says. Direct quote. Now, of course, I can't tell you what to take. We're discussing this paper for academic reasons, but that's interesting. So myself, vitamin K2, of course, is fat soluble. So the fat soluble vitamins are ADEK, A, D, E, and K. Now, I am not advertising any brands, but this is just a vitamin K2 I got. It's 600 microgram dose. Vitamin K is available from many other manufacturers. I do not get any. I don't get any money from any pharmaceutical people for advertising their drugs. But that's 600 micrograms. So I'm taking one of those a week. I'm taking an extra 600 micrograms of K2 a week. And the idea with that is that the vitamin K2 will take the calcium, instead of it high calcium levels going into your blood, the high calcium levels will go into your bone. Or rather, they won't go from your blood into your tissues, because it's okay sort of being in the blood, but you don't want it to go into the tissues. You don't want calcified blood vessels. But you do want calcified bones, of course, otherwise you're going to get soft bones and osteoporosis, which is lack of bone mass, which of course is a huge problem. So that's what these authors are saying. And it is worth taking time to read this paper, because it's absolutely excellent. It's quite readable. It's not a simple read, but it's not. The non-scientist can read this and understand it. It is a very comprehensible piece of work, and in my view, a very thorough piece of work, which is of course why I brought it to you. So the authors of this paper are saying that 4 to 10,000 units of vitamin D a day in winter, that's 100 to 25 micrograms, 100 micrograms to 250 micrograms rather. So like these again, I absolutely promise I'm not making any money advertising these. These are just some I've been using myself. These are 25 micrograms of vitamin D. 25 micrograms, and 25 micrograms is 1,000 international units. So this is saying take 4 to 10 of these a day. This would be saying, according to this. So that's actually quite a few tablets, isn't it? That's like it's kind of, what's that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So it's easily saying you could take those 7 to give you 7,000 international units a day. As I say, I can't prescribe for you. I'm only telling you what this paper says for academic interest. So there you go, taking it with the vitamin K2. But you see, what's certainly true is if you've got high levels of vitamin D in the blood, that's going to increase the amount of calcium that's absorbed from the gastrointestinal tract. And if you're eating a bit of cheese and drinking some milk, then you're going to be getting quite a bit of calcium. You know, the idea that you need these huge extra ones may turn out to be not quite what was needed. New knowledge will probably demonstrate that in the future. And this paper does comment, again, direct quote. So this knowledge about the large doses of calcium, but you need the vitamin D and the vitamin K2 in preference, and you can take the large doses of vitamin D as long as you take a little bit of vitamin K2. It's saying this knowledge is still not widespread in the medical community, and obsolete warnings about the risk of vitamin D3 overdose, unfortunately, are still commonly circulating, even amongst doctors. Now, Doctors these days are very guideline driven, and it can take government guidelines an awful long time to change. I remember we had this when the Helicobacter pylori eradication therapy first came out. It took doctors ages to start eradicating Helicobacter pylori. I was aware of it for about 1991, and it wasn't being commonly done really until the late 90s. Such a pity there's such a delay on these things. Now, acute respiratory distress syndrome and cytokine release syndrome, cytokine storm. So the cytokines are released. That causes this massive inflammatory reaction, and that causes the acute respiratory distress syndrome, and that's what kills people. So vitamin D is able to inhibit the underlying metabolic pathways which cause the cytokine storm. So again, lack of vitamin D could mean more cytokines released and more risk of cytokine storm. Vitamin D3 has a protective role against acute respiratory distress syndrome, particularly caused by SARS coronavirus 2, because it does other things to the ACE2 receptors and makes them less likely to cause the cytokine storm in the lungs. A rapidly increasing number of publications are investigating the vitamin D3 status of SARS coronavirus 2 patients, so this is being looked at more as an observational study rather than an interventional study, unfortunately. But these studies have confirmed low vitamin D levels in cases of severe courses of infection. So there's no real doubt about this, that people that are low in vitamin D have more severe infections. I mean, there it is. That's the fact as stated by the paper. Low vitamin D levels in cases of severe courses of infection. Now, of course, on this channel, we always give evidence. And I could give huge amounts of evidence for everything we've said so far, but of course, that would make it remarkably boring for you. But let me just give you an example. So here's some of the here's some of the evidence for this statement here. Low vitamin D levels in cases of severe courses of COVID infection. So there is lower vitamin D levels in people that get more severe illness. Now here's the references that support that. And these are all hyperlinked. I can't put them all in the description because YouTube only allows you so many words. But these are all papers that show that. And if you go to the original paper, you can click on any of these links. We're dealing with massive amounts of evidence. Now, a lot of these are relatively low numbered papers with very relatively low numbers of patients in. And that's because a lot of these papers are carried out by the clinicians themselves, because drug companies, of course, have no interest in spending a lot of money on vitamin D research because they can't sell it and get a lot of money back. Why governments aren't researching this, of course, is a completely different question. Government should be researching this and publishing the data and advising the populations accordingly. That's a different question. Positive results from vitamin D treatment, earlier the better, of course, preferably before someone gets sick. And again, just some references there for that. These references are all supporting that contention. So I haven't put this all the way through because it would become a remarkably boring talk. But it is all there. If you want to see it, click on the original link, and you can click on all these hyperlinks. And I haven't clicked on them all myself, but they are there. So conclusions. This is the paper authors, recommend raising serum blood levels above 50 nanograms per mil. That is 100 to 150 nanomoles per litre. So they want to raise it to at least 50 nanograms per mil. And the reason for that is to prevent or mitigate new outbreaks due to escape mutants or decreased antibody activity. Now, the thing about the vaccines is that vaccines encourage the survival of mutations which are resistant to the immunological response generated by the vaccine. But this doesn't work like that. The vitamin D just greatly increases the capabilities of your own immune system, so it'll work against anything, all variants, of course, because it just increases your immune system. So carrying on with the vaccination, we could get a vaccine escape mutants, which wouldn't be good. And so, as I said, this was done when vaccines weren't available, so this is showing good results before vaccines. Patient with sufficiently high D3 serum levels preceding the infection were highly unlikely to suffer a fatal outcome. There you go. Patients with sufficiently high serum levels preceding the infection were unlikely to suffer from a fatal outcome. So this idea, as we said, pretty well everyone agrees that people with low vitamin D levels don't do as well. What some people say, though, is it's the illness which lowers the vitamin D levels. This is saying, no, these people were tested before they became ill and the prediction was still valid. And I'm convinced by that, personally. This correlation should have been good news when vaccination was not available, but instead it was widely ignored. Now, why would governments want to ignore this and instead seemingly spend all their energy promoting vaccination? Now, vaccination is important. We're not saying this is not an anti-vax video. Please don't think that. We need vaccination. But why would governments apparently ignore the beneficial effect and the immunity enhancing effect of optimizing people's vitamin D levels, thereby optimizing people's vitamin D status, therefore making people get less sick? I really don't understand why that was widely ignored. I tried, David Davis tried, we did a couple of interviews with David Davis MP, who brought this up in Parliament several times, but it doesn't alter the fact that it was widely ignored by the chief medical officers in the United States and the United Kingdom. If you meet them, ask them why, because I don't know. The low threshold for healthy vitamin D levels should lie at approximately 125 nanomoles or 125 nanomoles per litre or 50 nanograms per mil, not the 20 nanograms per mil that is necessary for preventing rickets. So these recommendations, you could argue, I mean, we've known that people have known that it's even before my time, people have known that vitamin D prevents rickets since, Victorian times. This is 120 years ago. And yet, when these levels, the levels that were required to prevent rickets were worked out literally 100 years ago, it is more than 100 years ago now, they don't seem to have been updated. What's going on? Why don't the medical authorities update this information? And this paper is saying, if this was done, if everyone was put up to 50 nanograms per mil, this would save most lives, reducing the impact even for patients with various comorbidities. So this is going to protect everyone, including those with comorbidities, to some extent, or to a large extent. This, to our knowledge, is the first study that aimed to determine an optimum levels of D3 to minimise COVID-19 mortality. So there you go, that's the first time that this has appeared in the literature. And the answer is we need to get our vitamin D levels up to 50 nanograms per mil, according to this paper, which is 125 nanomoles per litre. Therefore, everyone should get their vitamin D levels measured, and doctors should titrate the vitamin D levels up to these optimum levels, according to the authors of this paper. Of course, most doctors won't test for your vitamin D levels because it's quite expensive. But surely this would be a cost-effective, very cost-effective strategy, you would have thought. Implications for herd immunity. The paper said, it seems clear that a good immune defence does not provide protection against physical infection. In other words, you'll still be exposed to the organisms. And if you're exposed to the organisms, you'll generate specific, active, acquired immunity. So the vitamin D levels aren't stopping you being exposed to the organism. They're not stopping you generating immunity to the organism, but they are stopping you getting sick and dying when you are exposed to the organism. So that's a win-win situation. We still get herd immunity, but no one dies, or very few people die. That is just brilliant. That's what we want. This protection was most effective at around about 55 nanograms per mil. The way, if you watch the previous video, we actually looked at this on the graphic here. This is the graphic for the negative inverse correlation. And we found out that when we got to this level here of about vitamin D levels of about 50 nanograms per mil, theoretically this green combined late data line went down to a death rate of 0. Whereas for people with the lower levels of vitamin D here, we see that the mortality was much higher. They were much more likely to die. I mean, it's just absolutely, like, those lines are clear. People with high levels of vitamin D are getting lower levels of death. It's a clear inverse correlation. And this paper has given the evidence to argue that it's not a cause of the illness, but the illness is a cause of the lack of vitamin D. Now, another reason I'm convinced by this, it's kind of a bit more philosophical, really, and it's this. I've probably got some of these. I've got that one up there. Yeah, I've got that paper there. Look, traditional living populations in East Africa have a mean serum 25-hydroxy D vitamin concentration of 115 millimoles per litre or higher. Now, of course, you and I deny it as we might try to. We are hunter-gatherers. That's what we are. We are designed, evolved to survive by gathering and foraging for roots and vegetables. Then once a week, once a month, the young men in the tribe might make a kill and will eat meat. We are hunter-gatherers. We're fishers. We're foragers for limpets on the seashore. That's what we are. And of course, all those things are outdoors. So this is traditional living populations in East Africa. People who live in a traditional hunter-gatherer way. Natural vitamin D levels seen amongst traditional hunter-gatherer lifestyles, even when there's lots of infectious diseases around, in a natural environment, the vitamin D levels go up to 45 to 50 nanograms per mil. So these people had way higher, that's 110 to 125 nanomoles per litre. These people living a natural lifestyle had way higher levels of vitamin D than we do in our natural circumstance here, where the government just wants us to get it above 20 or even up to 30 according to the World Health Organization. According to the World Health Organization, if you've got 30 nanograms per mil, you're not deficient. They count that as sufficiency. But that's not good enough for the hunter-gatherers. They have 45 to 50 because they're living outdoors all the time. A traditional lifestyle which we are supposed to live. That our physiology, your anatomy is that of a hunter-gatherer. And if you want to try and change that by eating cream cakes and not exercising, not working and doing things that are inconsistent with the hunter-gatherer lifestyle, we'll get these so-called diseases of civilization that we talked about, the obesity, the heart disease, cerebrovascular accidents, the hypertension, all of these diseases associated with what we're calling, for want of a better term, civilization. WHO advice may not be correct, therefore, so 30 nanograms per mil is considered by the WHO to be the threshold of sufficiency. So they're saying you've got sufficient vitamin D if it's above 30 nanograms per mil, whereas people with traditional lifestyles have 40 to 50 nanograms per mil. Now, if these people with traditional lifestyles are exposed to even greater amounts of sunshine, the vitamin D levels still don't go higher. So it looks like human physiology has kind of optimized this as the optimum, around about 50 as the optimum vitamin D level. But most of us are way below that. Future mutations of the SARS coronavirus 2 vaccine escape immune. So, as we've said, vaccines could cause immune escape, resulting in organisms or types of viruses that are not where the vaccines no longer protect us, but for the vitamin D, that will still work. It will still work. And they say the entire population should raise their serum vitamin D levels to be at safe levels as soon as possible. Direct quote from the paper. As long as enough vitamin K2 is provided, the suggested D3 levels are entirely safe to achieve by supplementation, according to the authors of this paper. Now, of course, this is for academic interest only. I'm not advising you what to do. The authors of this paper are not advising you what to do, but that's what they say. That's a direct quote. As long as enough vitamin K2 is taken, and that's probably about 200 micrograms per day. No, we'll look at the vitamin K2 in a minute, actually. I think the recommendations are a microgram per kilogram per day. But this is saying if you take a lot of vitamin D, which we need to take, because we don't get it from the sun, then you probably need to increase that a bit. And the paper also mentions the importance of selenium, magnesium, zinc, vitamins A and E. You're very unlikely to be short of vitamins A and E, I would have thought, but selenium, magnesium and zinc people can be short of, and all of these things are important. It should also be controlled for and supplemented where necessary to optimise the conditioning of a well-functioning immune system. So we need to optimise our immune system. Now, I am going to tell you how we can, in fact, I think I'll do that next. This can be proved or disproved quite easily. All we need to do is test positive PCR contacts of an affected person for D3 levels immediately. In other words, people that are likely to have been infected, just get a few thousand of them. So as soon as someone tests positive, round up all the other members of their household, test the other members of the household for vitamin D levels, and then you'd know what they are. Obviously, their vitamin D levels would not have been decreased by illness because they've just been exposed to the virus a few hours ago, because a member of their household has just tested positive. So before any onset of any symptoms, so as soon as they become infected, even before they've started the incubation period, test the vitamin D levels, and then follow them for 3 weeks, relate the course of their symptomatology to D3 levels. It's that simple. The same results as shown above must be obtained if the hypothesis is correct. Now, why the heck are governments not doing this? It's not even an interventional study. You don't even have to organise a clinical trial. All you have to do is take people, just 10, 20,000 of them, it will be so easy to do, that have been exposed to the virus by a household contact who've just tested positive, test all those contacts' vitamin D levels, because we know they're at increased risk of infection from the same household, follow their course of illness, and you'll find, according to this paper, that those with higher vitamin D levels do better. Those with lower vitamin D levels are more likely to get very sick, more likely to be hospitalised, more likely to be ventilated, more likely to die. Why on earth don't we do that? You know, the fact that medical authorities are not doing this, because it's such a simple observational study, really is getting into the bounds of negligence as far as I can see, unless there's some other reason that they haven't sought fit to share with the hoi polloi like you and me. There's some reason that they haven't told us, or they're negligent. I really don't see an alternative. Now, just before we finish, I'm just going to look at vitamin K2 briefly here. Now, this is directly from the British government site, so this is live, so we can take this as definitive information, really. This one's on vitamin K. Good sources of vitamin K. Green leafy vegetables such as broccoli and spinach, so eat plenty of broccoli and spinach. Vegetable oils, don't want to eat too many of those, but cereal grains. So green leafy vegetables and cereal grains would be good. Small amounts of vitamin K can be found in meat and dairy foods, but the main things there that are good to eat: green leafy vegetables and vegetable oil. As I say, we don't want too much vegetable oil because it's often not the right kind of fat, but certainly cereal grains we want. So you can get vitamin K, get the vitamin K that we need easily from those healthy sources. How much vitamin K do I need? Adults need approximately 1 microgram of 1 microgram a day of vitamin K for each kilogram of body weight. So in other words, 65 kilogram person will need 65 micrograms. But this paper is saying take 200 micrograms extra if you're taking these higher 6, 7, 8, 9, 10,000 international units of vitamin D a day. So a microgram, as we know, is 1,000 times smaller than a milligram. You should be able to get the vitamin K that you need from eating a varied and balanced diet. So that's true, but this paper is saying, just to make it completely safe, if you're taking high doses of vitamin D as a tablet, do take some K2 as well, according to this paper. Any vitamin K your body does not need is stored because it's a fat-soluble vitamin, of course. What happens if I take too much vitamin K? There's not enough evidence to show what the effects might be of taking high doses of vitamin K supplements each day. What does the Department of Health and Social Care advise? You should be able to get all the vitamin K you need by eating a varied and balanced diet. If you take vitamin K supplements, do not take too much, as this might be harmful. And they're saying taking 1 milligram or less of vitamin K supplements daily is unlikely to cause any harm, and I'm taking 600 micrograms a week, which is 0.6 of a milligram, so that's way under what they consider to be harmful. So from that, it looks like it's it's pretty safe to take at the levels suggested by the paper. But of course, you'll have to decide that for yourself. This is just for academic interest. So there you go. Those British government's simple guidelines are really very helpful. So some interesting questions for the chief medical officers next time you meet them. Why on earth aren't they doing this simple observational study? Do that on 10, 20,000 people. The data will be definitive. We are predicting here that it will show that people with low levels of vitamin D don't do as well, and that by bunking it up we could massively improve the health of the population for essentially no cost, and yet it is not being done. Strange but true. Thank you for watching.